Welcome to the Early Edge NFL Player Prop Show, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I'm your host, Eric Cohen. I'm glad to be back. I missed last week's show, but the guys held it down and did pretty darn well. It's time for the playoffs, and we're going to break it all down this week. But first, let's recap how we did in Week 18. And even though I wasn't here at 3-1, the guys didn't like my Sam Darnold pick, and of course, when they don't like my picks, they usually lose. Uncle Dave, 3-1, way to go. We have some momentum on the show headed into the playoffs, and I know these guys are going to thrive. So let's get right to it and bring in the stars of the show. We have the best prop bettor, in my opinion, on the planet. It is the one, the only Prop Stars. And we have the smartest fantasy football mind, who, by the way, is the champion of our Dynasty League. I didn't get to congratulate you last week. Uncle Dave signs up for the league last minute and wins it. He took all of our money. This is what happens when you are the expert of all experts. Uncle Dave, I'm going to give you a chance. Anything you would like to say as the victor?
Oh, I already said quite a bit last week, so I don't think I need to do anything else to try and motivate you to take me down next year, EC. But I sure am glad I joined the league. That worked out nicely.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. Yeah.
Hey, is there a trophy for winning this league? Is there a championship belt? Is there a ring? Yeah, I could use a little bit of bling to go along with being the first ever winner of the SportsLine Expert Dynasty League.
All right, Proppy, what do you got?
We'll have to discuss that off stream, but I'm certainly open to it. It was the inaugural season, so surely the three of us can put our heads together and come up with something for those future champions. Also want to say, congrats to Dave. Also, EC, great to see you back. Dave and I held it down.
Yes, you did.
I had a rough week. I had a dreadful end to my season. I don't hide from my losses. I am excited for the playoffs. I feel rejuvenated. I feel refreshed, and I'm going to do much better than I did over these final 5 to 6 weeks of the NFL season. That much I'm going to say. I'm going to guarantee, I'm going to call my shot right now. I will have better results than I've been having recently.
Well, Prop, how long have you been doing this show for? It's like, this is year 4, right?
Year 4.
Yeah, you've never, ever had back-to-back weeks like what we've seen. And part of it, listen, I got to give you credit for something, because a lot of people, when they start losing, they start to add up more picks. They put more out there. They hope that they could win more often than lose, and they hope that they turn around. You haven't done that. In fact, you've done exactly what you said you were going to do when it comes to the end of the season. You are far more selective because the lines get sharper, and I think it's 2 picks each of the last weeks. I have no idea how many picks you have this week. I haven't looked at your picks. I want to react in real time to them. So I'm curious to see how you zag after you've zigged over the last 2 weeks, but I have full confidence that you'll turn it around. Your track record says as much.
And I want to say one thing. Proppy's still your number one in SportsLine's NBA picks right now. If you go to the NBA page, look for the top experts. You are number one. Mike Barner's giving you a run, but you're still number one. So way to go with that. That's no surprise, like you were last year. And secondly, I mean, the playoffs, there's, like you put in picks earlier this week. You found some lines that you like, and those lines adjust. So you want to, as soon as you're watching the show, you want to get in on that. Go ahead, Proppy.
I did want to expand on that. Yeah. So again, week 1 or wild card weekend, week 1 technically of the NFL playoffs. I mentioned how the lines really tightened up. Dave alluded to it as well. EC mentioned it. I feel like there's a lot more opportunities so far in wild card weekend. I think the market would also reflect that as well when we've seen some of the movement that we've seen. So I do feel like there are an abundance of opportunities here, and certainly more than we were getting towards the conclusion of the season. So definitely excited. I love wild card weekend.
Yeah, Bobby in the chat asks, hey, Uncle Dave, don't you have Proppy alerts set to your phone from the SportsLine app? When Proppy makes a pick, a notification will pop up. Come on now.
I don't, and there's a reason for it. It's so I can react naturally on the show.
All right, well, we're going to give you a chance right off the bat. All right, Proppy, let's start with a game on Sunday night. Commanders and Buccaneers. We're going to start with receiving props. Which way are you going?
I kind of want to hone in on Dave's face here because I'm going to fade a Hall of Famer. We're going to come out of the gate with the full-on contrarian pick here. I'm going to fade Mike Evans. I'm going to go under 76.5 receiving yards for Mike Evans. I'd play this one down personally to 72.5. Mike Evans had his 11th consecutive 1,000-yard season. I believe he tied Jerry Rice as far as the only other wide receiver to do that in NFL history. Certainly very impressive. Mike Evans, closed the season out with a bang. We really saw Tampa Bay force feed him the football. It was clearly a priority of Baker Mayfield and the Bucs to get Mike Evans 1,000 yards. And as a result, I feel like this line is inflated. So during the regular season, Mike Evans' receiving line typically fluctuated between 63.5 to 68.5. It wasn't towards the end of the season when we got into incentive season that this line really went up. So I do believe that this line is a few ticks or a few yards too high as a result of how productive Mike Evans was at the end of the season. Now that we've reached the NFL playoffs, while Mike Evans will certainly be a focal point of Tampa Bay's game plan, they're not going to be force feeding the ball to anyone. Baker will take what's given to him and what's open. And I would argue this is a very difficult matchup, way more difficult than it may appear at first glance. The Washington Commanders, if we look at their totality, we look at the season as a whole defensively, kind of a mid-tier defense. Pass defense was pretty good, not great. However, they got off to an absolutely dismal start weeks 1 through 5. After week 5, this was one of the best pass defenses in the NFL this season. Also, just look at the amount of guys that went over 100 yards after week 5 against Washington. I believe it's 1 or 2 players, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correctly. They gave up the 6th fewest yards to opposing wide receivers this season. So a much more difficult matchup than it may appear, and what I think is an inflated line as a result of some stat chasing towards the end of the regular season makes this a good spot, in my opinion, to fade Mike Evans.
All right, so I just want to follow that up with, so in the chat, Big Cheesy and Kale both like Jalen McMillan's numbers. Now, Kale gave it out at 50.5. Big Cheesy said 54.5. What number would you prefer on McMillan if you choose to go that route?
What were the two options? I'm sorry.
50.5 and 54.5 for Jalen McMillan. Would you feel confident in playing either of those numbers to the over?
I lean over on McMillan. I was impressed. He has elite route participation. He's running a drop back on every every Baker Mayfield drop back. So I thought he came on strong. I know Dave liked him as well. He was a pick of Dave's for a couple of weeks there. So I like McMillan. I definitely lean over. Again, I think it's a difficult matchup. I think Mike Evans will get the majority of the defensive attention as far as the opposing wide receivers are concerned. But I'd certainly lean over. I'd like the 50 if I got that, obviously, because it's lower than 54.5.
Dave, there's this whole storyline about Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore over the years where they fight and Lattimore gets in his head. Do you buy into that for this particular matchup?
I thought that's where Prop was going to go with this, and he didn't. And that just adds another layer to why you might consider taking the under. I certainly look at this as either you take the under or you stay away from Mike Evans. Lattimore does have a very good track record of not only limiting the production of Mike Evans, but really ticking off Mike Evans. Evans has gotten kicked out of games because he's fought with Marshawn Lattimore. And Lattimore, who's really only played in 2 games with Washington since being traded, only played 71 snaps. I'm looking at the numbers from Pro Football Focus right here, has allowed a 50% catch rate, 13.6 yards per catch. That's a bit of a problem. 3 penalties against him. You remember that from the Eagles game. That helped Philadelphia out, but that takes away numbers from Mike Evans would get. This is another reason to take the under on Evans, is because Lattimore does have a track record of limiting, slowing down, getting Evans kicked out of games. And that's something I'm sure the Commanders would like to have on their side. If he's healthy, if he's right, a couple of ifs in there, but it's yet another reason why the under makes sense here. I'm glad you asked me about it, EC.
Yeah, you can't. Mike Evans not getting kicked out of a playoff game. I think we all know that. But, well, I mean, that would be.
He does. These guys do not like each other. And it would make sense for the Commanders to put Lattimore on Evans pretty much any time they are both on the field. Lattimore's a perimeter cornerback. Evans typically plays along the outside. I don't think Lattimore would follow Evans into the slot. Commanders have a good slot corner in Sanistro. So there's really moves here that make me nervous to take the over on such a high number. Therefore, the under makes a lot of sense. And the over makes sense for McMillan because McMillan's not going to get defended by Lattimore. I think McMillan would run past Lattimore.
Proppy?
The dynamic reminds me a little bit, and Dave will appreciate this. So will some of the older guys. You probably will as well. You see a little Cortland Finnegan, Andre Johnson dynamic there with Lattimore and Mike Evans. So if you're over 30 years old, you'll certainly remember those two. And there was a very pesky corner, Cortland Finnegan, who used to get under the skin of the majority of alpha wide receivers, and Andre Johnson, who was one of the best wide receivers of his era. Also very quiet and reserved guy. Never saw him being emotional. They got into an amazing fight. And if you want to see some highlights, and he's a guy, a product of the U, Uncle Dave, which you
damn right
know. So I would go on YouTube, type in Andre Johnson fight, and you will see a very impressive fight between him and Cortland Finnegan.
But what's amazing about that, Proppy, is that when you meet Andre Johnson, he's the most chill, down-to-earth guy. Just like all of us from the U, very modest, humility.
Well, I mean, that's why it was so shocking to see Andre Johnson lose his cool. I mean, Cortland Finnegan.
Well, Finnegan was messing around with him, man, and you can't mess around with a guy too much without, eventually getting it back. So that's on Finnegan.
Found out.
Yes. By the way, one of the ways that I think the Bucs can stay in this game, if not outright win this game, is by running the ball. I have no idea if either of you have any Bucky Irving props. I looked at them. I think the numbers they set for Bucky were purposely high because they want to protect themselves from Bucky Irving having a monster game against the Commanders. But the more running that Tampa does, remember, they've got two decent running backs, not just one, the less opportunity there will be for either wide receiver to go over their number. The more I think about the Mike Evans under, the more I like it.
That's a terrific point. One I did mean to include here. The Washington Commanders are a significant run funnel, partially because the strength of the defense is the pass defense, but because their run defense is extremely vulnerable. And we've seen Tampa Bay this season. This isn't the Tampa Bay that we've seen over the past couple of years. Has been the most inefficient and ineffective running team. This team was one of the best running teams, thanks to Bucky Irving, but also Rachaad White, who you mentioned as well, Dave. This Tampa Bay team ran the football extremely effectively all season long. Really down the stretch, we saw Bucky Irving emerge as one of the best running backs in football this season. So I do anticipate, while it's a neutral or positive game script for Tampa Bay, they're going to be very balanced, and I think we'll see potentially limited Baker Mayfield dropbacks.
Yeah. All right, we're going to talk about that later. We're going to talk about because I have a prop with Baker Mayfield later. All right, so we'll hold that one. Let's move on to a proppy favorite that Uncle Dave, you chose here, a rookie wide receiver who you think is going to have a nice game in his postseason debut. This is a Prop Stars special dating back to last spring when we talked NFL draft and all the way through the season. Who you got?
Yeah, it just goes to show how sharp Proppy is when it comes to these guys. And I saw him practice in person at the Senior Bowl last year. So I'm not that surprised that he's carved out a role as the primary receiver in the Chargers offense. It's Ladd McConkey. We're taking the over on his receiving yards, and the number is going up. When I initially started to look into this, it was 73.5. Now you're going to find it at 75.5. Guess what? I would still take the over. He's locked up at least 80 yards in each of his past 3 games and 6 of his past 7. That's encouraging, but it's the matchup, EC. That's what I really like. I think McConkey will stick in the slot. He's played there 60% of his snaps. He's done that in 6 of his last 7 games. When Quentin Johnston's been on the field, that's a big factor because Johnston typically plays on the outside. It allows McConkey to focus more playing in the slot. It's going to mean that he's going to avoid both of Houston's really good outside cornerbacks. It makes the matchup a lot better. He's going to see guys like Miles Bryant, Eric Murray. I'm not going to say that these are bad cornerbacks, but by comparison to the other corners that Houston has, I would say it's favorable for Ladd McConkey. And the Texans play a lot of zone coverage. They won't necessarily pressure Herbert a lot, and that gives McConkey added time to get open. He's got great route running skills, prop, you know that. And because the Texans' run defense has played well lately, and it's a question mark with J.K. Dobbins. I wouldn't say he lit the world on fire in his first game back from injury last week. I think Justin Herbert's going to have to do more for the Chargers offense if they're going to win that game. And if they're going to do that, that means that there's going to be more targets available for Ladd McConkey, his number one guy in the offense. So I'm fine playing this. I would play this as high as 77.5, and I would consider a sprinkle on a ladder over 79.5 and over 89.5 as well. I think there is potential for Ladd McConkey to have a very nice game, but the one that I like the most is the regular old prop line over 74.5 receiving yards at -110.
Yeah, and Scott in the chat says he would ladder McConkey to 100 yards. What about you, Proppy?
I love this spot. Needless to say, as Dave mentioned regarding McConkey, just as we watch the season progress, we watch McConkey just get more and more comfortable. We saw the Chargers really open up the offense early in the year. They were just hyper conservative. We really thought, the Greg Roman effect mixed with Harbaugh, they would just run the ball, 75% of the time. But Justin Herbert, newsflash, is an extremely talented quarterback. And then he has an exceptional weapon in Ladd McConkey, who over the final 10 games of the season was as productive as almost any wide receiver in the NFL. This guy just understands. This idea that he's just operating, close to the line of scrimmage and he's a traditional slot receiver is just foolish. He's able to run the full route tree. He's just an exceptional wide receiver, and really just saw him get more and more comfortable as the season progressed. And he's incredibly difficult to cover, especially the way they utilize him and line him up. So I love the way he's being deployed and featured in that offense. So I love the spot for McConkey. If the Houston can push the Chargers, which is certainly within the potential range of outcomes here, he could easily eclipse 100 receiving yards. But I do love this prop. I think this is far closer to his floor than his ceiling in this game. So, if they can get pushed a bit, I think he can easily go for triple digits.
All right, Proppy, we're going to see if you like this one that I'm going to throw out there. This is I have two props in one. I'm going to go Marvin Mims over 38.5 receiving yards. I know this has gone up to the low 40s. I would still probably play it up to about 43. Now, Larry is on this combined number on the site at 44.5, but Mims rushing high in the last 7 games is 4 yards, so I'm going to pass on that. He's over this number, 38.5, in 6 of his last 7 games, averaging nearly 5 targets per game in those 7 games. However, the reason I'm playing this is I'm also going to throw in a longest reception over 19.5 yards. This one is -110. I never play this, but why am I doing that? Because in each one of those 6 games that he has gone over the 38.5 number, he has had at least one catch of 32 or more yards. So if he goes over this number, he's going to have a big play. That's what we've seen, and so I'm going to play that. Plus, I think that game flow is in our favor with Denver likely chasing points towards the end, and I could see a backdoor cover element for the Broncos towards the end of the game. Proppy, I got to know. You're giving me that sinister look here. What do you think?
I want to say, you made a compelling case for Marvin Mims. And I do want to also mention that when we're talking about Marvin Mims, this isn't a knock on his talent. I think he's a very dynamic football player. And I want to also mention I was encouraged by the way he was utilized down the stretch over those final 6 games of the season. Sean Payton finally was manufacturing him some touches. But then I took a closer look at Marvin Mims, and there's still some big red flags as far as I'm concerned. Just the route participation and the snap share for being more productive and making a lot more splash plays. His route participation really hasn't grown that much. He's still only on the field between 30 and 50% of the snaps. That is still a big concern. I also wonder in the playoffs, I think towards the end of the regular season, things were a little experimental in that offense. I do want to see what this looks like in the playoffs. I would also look at the strength of schedule for Denver towards that stretch. A lot of the big games, came against Cincinnati's pass defense. I think Buffalo is a much more difficult opponent. I would also offer this. I personally thought about fading Marvin Mims, but my favorite prop of his wasn't one that you put out. I honestly think that this could come in and mine could come in. The one that I like was under 3.5 receptions, and you could find that at plus $1.30. I thought that was an exceptional price point for Marvin Mims, who again is being utilized down the field, just not a high volume role. So I think 4 receptions, a lot would have to go right. He'd have to be very efficient. That being said, I love a showdown EC, and while I do much prefer the receptions fade, I will give it a shot with the receiving yards. If you're game EC, we can have an old-fashioned $100 showdown. What say you?
Claire, hit the music.
It's gonna be a showdown.
This is my first showdown of this football season anywhere. I have not done any, and I hate going against you, Proppy. You know that. But I am confident that the Marvin Mims breakout is real. So, Uncle Dave, play the judge and jury here. Which side do you like better? 38.5 over for me or under for Proppy?
I am going to say that I like the over. And I understand that I'm talking about a wide receiver who doesn't even play 50% of the dropbacks for Bo Nix. But I think he nailed the game script. I think this is going to be a situation where Denver is going to have to throw more than run. A little bit more on that later. And I also just don't know how well the Broncos will be able to run the ball. And when they use Marvin Mims, and Prop, you talked about this. They've been using Marvin Mims out of the backfield where he can't get pressed off the line of scrimmage. He gets a running start, and that's something that just makes him even more devastating. And this is the type of game against the Bills pass defense that honestly, like, they really have not looked amazing down the stretch. I think we could see Marvin Mims get manufactured that number of yardage, and it's not that many yards. The only thing that makes me want to just pump the brakes on jumping in on this showdown is that I almost feel like that the line's too low, and they could have gotten away with giving 45.5. And you mentioned Soda Propinski that the receptions line was 3.5 and it's juiced to the under. I think they want people to take
It's juiced to the over.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, it's plus money on the over.
Plus money on the under.
It's plus money on the under.
Yeah, it's plus 130 under 3.5. But that's
Okay, I thought it was plus 130 on the over. All right, so then forget it. I'm not going to say what I was going to say, but I would not be surprised in the least if Marvin Mims has a pretty good game.
You know, early in last week's game against Kansas City, they threw a deep ball to Marvin Mims. I was like, all right, here we go. Now, this is what we need early. I want to win this showdown right off the bat. Don't let me down, Marvin Mims. All right.
I just want to point out, I'd be far more comfortable if the showdown was the receptions line. But for the sake of entertainment, for the sake of the people, and to maybe increase your bank account and give you some extra spending money at the wedding that you're attending, EC, we will do it on the yardage.
Need a lot of money for that, Proppy. We got a hammer Marvin Mims. Plus, we got college football tonight. Big Ohio State and Texas game. All right, coming up next, Proppy's got a running back prop that I actually really, really like. Don't want to spoil it for you, Uncle Dave, but Proppy will tell us more after we hear from one of our sponsors. All right, it's time here. We got 2 games on CBS. We're talking about all the games. Now, in future weeks, we'll break them down game by game, but since there's 6 games here, it probably would take a little bit longer. So I figured we would just break it down by rushing, receiving. So we've done our receiving props. Let's get to rushing. And Proppy, you know I'm a Packer fan. I'm thrilled to see my team in the playoffs. I hate that they tried to essentially were not caring about winning last week, and it cost them a chance. Now they got to go play your Eagles again, which is gross, and we all know what's going to happen. But Josh Jacobs has been awesome down the stretch. So that means he should have a great game, right?
No, you see, I think Josh Jacobs is going to struggle here against my Philadelphia Eagles here. So I'm going to go under 70.5 rushing yards. This was a line that I jumped on as soon as this opened. Got some decent closing line value so far. Still think it's plenty playable at the 70.5 line. But if you're a SportsLine subscriber, you'd have gotten a significantly better number. But yeah, I think this is a good spot to fade Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs had a very strong season. After watching him last year, I was concerned when Green Bay handed him that contract, but he proved to be, he was very inefficient last year. But yeah, he proved to be pretty good this season for Green Bay. Certainly reliable in the backfield there. Green Bay is a very balanced football team, and he played well. However, down the stretch, Josh Jacobs' efficiency plummeted. He's been under 70 yards in 5 of his last 6 games here. Now he's facing an Eagles team that's arguably the best defense in the NFL. If we look under the hood at the advanced metrics, they're certainly a top 3 defense here. Number 2 in EPA allowed per rush. Number 2 in success rate as well against the rush. So a very difficult matchup for Josh Jacobs. I also wonder if game script will be in his favor. We know Green Bay are 4.5 points underdogs in this spot. So certainly the Eagles are more than capable of potentially putting Green Bay in a position where they won't be as balanced as they would like to be. But I just think it's a difficult matchup, a fairly big number, and I wonder if Josh Jacobs isn't a little bit run down after some massive usage early and midway through the season for Green Bay. So I just think this Eagles defense is a lot more stout than the odds makers were initially giving him credit for, and I think the market has trended that way as well.
I think it's a good play here. Uncle Dave, what do you think?
In the past 5 games against running backs, Philadelphia's allowed 3.4 yards per carry, a 4.9% rush rate of 10 or more yards. That is minuscule, and 1 rushing touchdown. This is not the type of spot for Josh Jacobs to flourish in unless Philadelphia has an epic meltdown on both sides of the ball. That's really the only way that I could see that happening is if this defense doesn't come to play and if the Philadelphia offense just can't ignite and not put points up on the board. There have been 9 games this year where Jacobs has had 71 or more rushing yards. 7 of 9 were Green Bay wins. 2 were losses, and one of the losses was against Philadelphia in week 1 in that game in South America. 2 of the wins, by the way, by 10-plus yards. So there have been a lot of close games where the Packers have won and he's gone over. You can tell that I've done my research on Jacobs both with the rushing yards and his rush attempts. I kind of like the rush attempts under better than the rushing yards under, but there is no way that I would take the over on either of these. So I'm in lockstep ultimately with Proppy on this one.
We got this out at 75.5. Presently 69 or 68 on some books. 70 is the best number, the highest number you can find on Josh Jacobs. So.
Man, I wish I had known that you had got it out at 75.5. How could I have possibly known, EC, that he got it out at 75.5? What miraculous website or app is out there that would have let me know that he would have gotten this out at 75.5?
Uncle Dave, if you on your phone, if you were to download the SportsLine app and you were to click on Alex's page and then click on enable notifications, that's all you have to do. Every time he puts in a pick for any sport, it comes up instantaneously. That is what is so great about this app. And it's very timely, especially with these lines moving and with Proppy getting in these NFL lines earlier in the week. And we're going to see that as the postseason goes along. So I think it's a very valuable tool. Not just Uncle Dave, but you out there, whoever listening or watching, please make sure to enable notifications for both of these guys. Me, it's optional. Your call if you want to do that. Hey, I got a pick here. We're going to see what you think about this one. So Derrick Henry, I'm going to play his over 96.5 rushing yards at minus 120. So the thing about this, when he's had 20 or more carries this season, he's 8 for 8 in going over 100 yards. Now, game script should be in our favor. The Steelers defense has done a very good job against Lamar Jackson historically and lately. And don't forget that Zay Flowers is not playing either. So Baltimore grind it out on the ground, use Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews at tight end, maybe Rashad Bateman. But this is going to be a mass volume game from Derrick Henry. So I'm also going to play the over 20.5 rushing attempts. This one is a little more juicy at minus 140, but it's a correlated play. Now, at some books, you can't play them together. Maybe some you can. But I think that Derrick Henry will get more than 21 carries, and more than 100 yards rushing as Baltimore salts the clock in the second half and keeps Pittsburgh's offense off the field. Uncle Dave, are you with me or against me?
I'm not going to be with you on the rush attempts just because of the juice at minus 140. I know I can get my money in elsewhere, and that's a lot of rush attempts, especially for a running back on the other side of 30 in a meaningful playoff game. However, I think it's worth pointing out a couple of things. When the Ravens were in this exact situation last year, their first playoff game at home, tough opponent, got to have a game. Obviously, it's the playoffs. What do you think? They're not going to want to have it. They didn't run the ball at all. And what's the first thing they did when the new year started in the NFL? They chased Derrick Henry and they got him to become a Baltimore Raven. So I think there is no question that he's going to have involvement, but the Steelers are going to know that. And guess what? Too bad. Over the last 5 games, the Pittsburgh Steelers have allowed 4.2 yards per carry, a 9% rate of runs of 10 plus yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. Okay, that's something that's interesting, just 1 rushing touchdown. But they got pummeled by Baltimore in week 16, and that was a game that Justice Hill left in. So it was all Derrick Henry. I think he had a 44-yard run as part of that game. This Steelers run defense, you said that they've been playing well. Yeah, maybe the last 2 weeks they've stepped up a little bit. But overall, in the past 5, they have not played well. And I think the Ravens are absolutely going to run the ball a ton. The odds makers made the rushing yardage line as high as they thought they could to try and get some people to just stay away from it, because they know that Derrick Henry could erupt, maybe even go nuclear for 130 or 140 yards. So you're taking a chance with the 96 yards, but at least there isn't a big juice price tag attached to it.
I do want to say this, Proppy. When they played 3 weeks ago, Derrick Henry, 24 carries, 162 rushing yards. So there is some precedent here. What do you think?
I think that bodes poorly for Derrick Henry. I think this Pittsburgh team has a tremendous amount of pride, bulletin board material. They're a huge underdog, double-digit underdog. We're talking about Mike Tomlin. We're talking about a 10-win team, although they did crater down the stretch, as Dave mentioned. But I think this team has a lot of pride, and I do think without Zay Flowers on the field, if I'm Pittsburgh and I'm devising the game plan, I'm going to put everything I can. I'm going to force Lamar to have to drop back and beat me down the field. So while Derrick Henry is certainly more than capable of having a big day, these are massive numbers. He can't really miss more than a half a series here if we're talking about 21 rushing attempts and over 100 yards against a divisional opponent that I'd imagine is very pissed off right now and has a lot to prove. Everyone's counting them out. You have a head coach that's certainly going to make those guys aware. These are professional athletes. I think this game is ultimately going to be closer than the odds makers believe. And I also believe that it's going to be tough sledding for Derrick Henry. That being said, I'm not playing his under or advising you guys to go out and play his under. I just wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if this is an extremely competitive football game and Derrick Henry has 21 carries for 86 yards.
Okay. Uncle Dave.
Baltimore's used multiple tight end sets 41% or more of the time in each of their past 4 games, as high as 69% in week 18. That was when Zay Flowers got hurt. If they line up and they play a lot of 2 tight end formations, yes, Pittsburgh is going to be up to the task of trying to slow down Derrick Henry, but that puts another blocker on the field. And I'm not saying that Isaiah Likely will always be one of those guys. I'm not saying Mark Andrews will always be one of those guys, but it does add another wrinkle to the chess game between the Steelers and the Ravens. And the door is open for the Ravens to do this because Zay Flowers isn't going to play, and they don't really have a good replacement for Zay Flowers. I would take a very long look at the tight end player props, and especially Likely, who's gotten a little bit more run over the last few weeks. It's not an official play, but if you think the game's going to go low scoring back and forth, and you really think, especially if Proppy says that the Ravens are just going to sell out to stop the run and dare potentially the league MVP to throw against them, the matchups are good for them at wide receiver. I don't know if they'll be as good at tight end, and it could really kick down the door for Andrews and Isaiah Likely to have a good game. Again, an unofficial pick, maybe worth a sprinkle, but this is why you don't fast forward to the end of these videos, people. we give you some nuggets along the way. And this is one that I kind of liked.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm going to give you another one here. Mark Andrews has a touchdown in 6 straight games and 10 of his last 12. So if you're looking to throw some same game parlays like I did last week, as when I was on the road in a non-betting state, got to put it in. Thank you, Derrick Henry, for hitting that. But Mark Andrews touchdown, there's value there. If you believe in the trends, which I do, I know Proppy's probably rolling his eyes. All right, let's move on to the next pick. All right, Prop, you got one more for us, and it's another under. I mean, this is a Proppy special. Let's go to Monday night. Game is out here in my neighborhood. I'm going to try, well, not my neighborhood, but about half an hour away. I'm going to try to get to the game. We'll see if it works out. Rams and Vikings, wish all the best to those in Southern California. If anyone is watching or listening, all the best with all of the fires. Just a sad deal. They had to move the game to Arizona. Talk about Kyren Williams, though, Proppy. Which way do you lean?
Yeah, I lean under for Kyren Williams for a variety of reasons. And I'm going with his rushing attempts here. And I'm going to take it under 21 and a half rushing attempts. Just a gargantuan number for Kyren Williams. That's only available on 1 or 2 books. The number that's going to be most commonly accessible is going to be 20 and a half. I'm still comfortable with it there. It's a multi-unit or a unit and a half play for me at 21 and a half, but you only have 20 and a half. Still comfortable. I'd scale down to 1 unit. But let's talk about why 21 or 22 in this case rushing attempts is a big deal for Kyren Williams. Under in 9 of 16 regular season games. What's interesting, though, if we look at the win versus loss splits here, he was under in 5 of the 6 Rams losses this season, averaging 17 rushing attempts in those Rams losses as well. This is a difficult matchup. They're underdogs, I believe, 3 points or 2.5 points, 3.5 points. What's the line in this game, guys?
I thought it was just 1 point.
Well, it was 2.5 as I looked at it because of the fact that they moved it, obviously to Arizona. You're going to have a lot more Vikings fans than you would have before.
So it's more of a neutral.
It's 2.5.
2.5.
2.5. So, yeah, anyway, they are underdogs in this game, facing a Vikings team or defense number 1 in EPA allowed per rush, number 3 in success rate. So this is, along with my Philadelphia Eagles, one of the league's premier rushing defenses. So if we look at 22 rushing attempts for Kyren Williams, who, again, he is one of the true workhorse backs in the NFL, one of the few guys that gets over 90% of the running back snaps in that backfield. So much has to go right to get 22 rushing attempts in a game. You need to stay healthy first and foremost for all 4 quarters. Even if you get dinged up, you can't really afford to miss a quarter or 2 series, then it's going to be hard to eclipse this number. You also need to work with positive or neutral game script. The Rams need to be playing with a lead, or at least playing or not trailing by more than a touchdown, and force to increase the passing volume. So just so much, and he has to be effective. Obviously, they're not going to continue to run the football over and over or give him 22 carries if Minnesota is completely shutting him down. So just so much has to go right to get 22 rushing attempts in a game, especially one where they're the underdogs versus an elite run defense. So this just looks like a good natural spot to fade Kyren Williams. His rush yards is only, I believe, 83 and a half, if I'm not mistaken. But again, this 22 number is just massive. So yeah, I like fading Kyren Williams quite a bit, rushing yards and rushing attempts. But my favorite is the attempts here at 21 and a half.
And unfortunately, Proppy, since he's doing an under, can't use the word nuclear in his analysis. But you know who can? It's Uncle Dave. When we're talking about quarterback props. And you and I are on, well, I don't want to say different sides, but we're going to have a quarterback play in this game. Why don't you start on the Commanders side with rookie Jaden Daniels? Which way are you leaning?
I love the over on Jaden Daniels passing and rushing yards. It's 280 and a half. Big fat number. And I'm taking the over on it. BetMGM has it at -115. And I like it for a unit and a half. Excluding week 18 for obvious reasons. I mean, he barely played in the game. Daniels has 292 or more pass and rush yards in each of his past 3 and 4 of his past 5. Clearly, the identity of this Commanders offense is running through their rookie QB. They wouldn't be in the playoffs if it wasn't for Jaden Daniels. Tampa Bay's defense is also one of the most consistent zone coverage and blitz crazy units in the league. What does that mean? It means Daniels knows he has to get the ball out quickly, and he's got to scramble if he can't get the ball out quickly. And when he scrambles, and he did this a lot at LSU, it did not automatically mean he was going to take off and run. He kept his eyes downfield, and he's made some great throws downfield off script. And those are the types of plays, whether he's throwing it off script like I'm talking about or running for yardage, that's made him such an asset to the Commanders. And it's why I think the over on this makes a ton of sense. And furthermore, the Bucs run defense, I mean, this is one of the best in the NFL. They've been more effective now than they were when they took on the Commanders earlier in the year. I can give you their numbers in their past 5 games. It makes them look like all-stars compared to the other defenses that we've talked about. And that just means that more work is going to fall on Jaden Daniels' shoulders. By the way, the Bucs have allowed 5.1 yards per carry to quarterbacks this year when you throw out kneel downs, which, I mean, you lose a yard on every single one of those kneel downs. That's actually a good number, but they've let up at least 30 rushing yards to Tommy DeVito, Bo Nix, Lamar Jackson, and Jaden Daniels. In week 1, Jaden Daniels' first ever NFL game was against these Bucs. He had 88 rushing yards. The passing yardage was terrible. He wasn't himself yet. He's grown into this role. He's helped the Commanders get to where they are, and I think he's going to be the reason why the Commanders advance into the divisional playoff round. Over 280.5 passing rush yards. He might get over 280 passing yards, period. I'm taking that at minus 115 at BetMGM for 1.5 units.
Well, and I like that, Uncle Dave, and I like the Commanders pick. I'm picking them outright to win as well. However, on the other side, especially if the game is higher scoring, as the over-under is the highest on the slate this week at 50.5, I think we're going to see a back-and-forth potential shootout game on Sunday night. But I'm going to roll with Baker Mayfield's over 267.5 passing plus rushing yards at minus 115. Now, Baker is over this in 5 straight games and 6 of his last 7. In each of those 7 games, the Buccaneers have not scored less than 24 points, which, by the way, I think they will exceed yet again this week. In Tampa Bay's last 2 one-possession games, so let's not include Week 17, Baker has rushed for 42 and 68 yards. So we don't necessarily need passing yards of 250 to get this done. We could get 230. Last week with 68 rushing yards, he was at like 220 or something like 232 or 222, something like that, and then got him over that number. So I think that he's going to be able to do it again. I think this is a back-and-forth affair, and I'm going to ride the trend. Even if Mike Evans gets shut down, Jalen McMillan, Cade Otton is back. Bucky Irving out of the backfield has made an impact. Rashad White is a good pass catcher. Sterling Shepard, if he's going to, can get some run, former college teammates. Throwing that out there, I'm rolling with Baker Mayfield's over. Proppy, what do you think? Which one of these 2 plays do you like better?
I prefer Dave's for a variety of reasons. I do believe Tampa Bay, Dave mentioned this, the run defense, incredibly stout. Their pass funnel, teams are opting to go pass heavy against them. It's the opposite if we're talking about the Commanders' defense.
True.
The Commanders' defense is a run funnel because of the strength of their pass defense and because of how weak and vulnerable their run defense is. So I could see Tampa Bay really, implementing a run-heavy approach where I believe the Commanders and Jaden Daniels will be aggressive and attack Tampa downfield where they've really struggled. So from a matchup standpoint, I do think it favors Jaden here. Also, Dave mentioned the run defense. Again, for Tampa, I talked about this a lot when we wanted to fade Chuba Hubbard. Unfortunately, he was inactive. But since week 13, no team has made a bigger improvement in EPA than this Tampa Bay run defense. So it's going to be tough sledding for Brian Robinson, who I looked to fade initially when the lines dropped. But the odds makers were obviously privy to these statistics as well, putting his line at only 47.5 14.5, which is extremely minuscule. But that was a line that I checked the moment it populated because I wanted to see if I could take advantage of this Tampa incredibly stout run defense. But no luck there, unfortunately.
Two
Go ahead,
things.
Dave.
Number one, I just want to put it out there because this seems to be a theme that we're going to with each of these games. Tampa versus running backs in their past 5 games, 3.1 yards per carry, a 4.3% rate of 10 yards or more allowed on the ground, and 1 rushing touchdown. Minuscule numbers. They've really been outstanding at stopping the run. Second thing, what was the number for this prop of yours, EC?
260. Let's see, 267.
Stop right there. It could be, all right, fine. Baker Mayfield has thrown for over 280 yards in 4 of his last 5 games. The cynic in me makes me think that they want us to take the over on this prop because why wouldn't we? Look at how good he's been just throwing the football. And I know this is when PropStars rolls his eyes at me, because I think that, the odds makers definitely know more than we do, and they're trying to goad us into a certain way. But I see that number, and I think about how high those numbers are for Bucky Irving, and it just makes me pause. I like your reasons for it. I do agree that it will be a shootout, but they're not giving away money. And it just seems like that's exactly what they're doing with this very prop. And it makes me like the Mike Evans under even more, by the way.
And there you go. Fair enough. All right. Now you have a couple more passing props, and you're going back to your bread and butter, Dave, and it's passing at completions and attempts. Yep. Let's start with Bo Nix. Let's start with, since that's the earlier game on Sunday, his completions. Are we going over or under?
We're going over. I love this one. Bo Nix over 22.5 completions at -118. Taking this one for a unit and a half as well. He's been a completion machine. He's been over this prop line in each of his past 3 games, 5 of his past 7 games. Buffalo has seen at least 22 completions in every single one of its last 8 games that weren't played in snowstorms. Were thrown out that game against the Niners, and 23 plus completions in 6 of those 8. The Bills play a ton of zone coverage and really only move to man-to-man coverage when they're in danger of losing the game. So I would expect them to play a lot of zone. They're also the rare team that doesn't blitz very much, nor do they rack up a ton of sacks, but they do pressure quickly. And that means that Nix has to get the ball out quickly. Well, as you know, EC, from watching Bo Nix in college, that's what he does best, is get the ball out quickly. So I went and I put in this exact scenario into a computer model. When facing defenses that play zone with quick pressure, Nix has completed 68.8% of his passes on a low ADOT in his past 4 games. That's good. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for a completion percentage close to, if not over 70%. And even if you go back to his last 8 games, bigger sample size, still a very high completion rate. And that's all I'm looking for here is completions. I don't care if they're 20 yards downfield or, a quick little flare pass to Marvin Mims that he takes 85 yards for a touchdown. I think the Broncos run offense, huge question mark. Bo Nix, more on his shoulders. If you look at his pass attempts prop, it's like 35.5. It's a huge number. That scared me, but this one doesn't. I think Bo Nix can get over 22.5 completions, -118 for a unit and a half.
All right. Now let's talk about a guy that you might be going the other way on here, which is Jalen Hurts. Are we going to see a lot of volume from Hurts in that Eagles-Packers game?
I don't think we are. I'm taking the under at 27.5 at even money, and it wouldn't surprise me if he ends this game with exactly 27 pass attempts. I think this is going to be a close one, but I think ultimately the under's the play, and I like that we can get it at plus 100. Not counting the game that he got concussed in because he barely played in that game. He's been under 28 pass attempts in 8 games this year. Guess what? You're going to like this one, Alex. All Philadelphia Eagles wins. Just once has he been over this line in a game the Eagles won by 2 or more scores. So if the Packers give them a game, or if they're just, doing what they do, Philadelphia is, then I think Jalen Hurts won't have to throw the football. Trends by the Packers defense suggest they'll stick with zone coverage while trying to pressure Jalen Hurts. I use the word trying instead of actually pressuring Jalen Hurts because it's really hard to pressure Jalen Hurts when he's got that offensive line in front of him. I'm sure that you're beaming right now, Prop. When defenses do that against Hurts and the Eagles this year, Philadelphia runs the ball 54% of the time. Okay, that means that they're only throwing it 46% of the time. But that rate actually jumps to 59% run when you're looking at just their past 5 games. And even if you filter out garbage time, which we've got the ability to do here at CBS, it's still running the football 59% of the time. So 6 out of 10 plays is a running play. And it might be a Hurts running play, but it's not a pass attempt. And that's what really matters to me. This is Philadelphia's identity right now. Saquon Barkley, with a week's worth of rest, should be raring to go. That offensive line should be great. Jalen Hurts has cleared the concussion protocol. He will play in this game. I don't think they have to lean on Jalen Hurts. I don't think they're going to have to, because I don't think the Packers, sorry, EC, are going to give them a huge fight in this game. You know, Jordan Love's dealing with an elbow issue. We don't love Josh Jacobs and his rushing. This could be an open and shut case for the Eagles and for Saquon Barkley to lead the way. Maybe we should be talking about Saquon's overs, but right now we're talking about Jalen Hurts unders. And this is the under I like best. Under 27.5 pass attempts, even money.
Uncle Dave, I'm starting to feel nauseous after all that rationale and seeing Proppy grinning like that. Go Pack, go on Sunday. Listen, I know better. I'm picking the Eagles to win the NFC. I'm not that foolish.
I'm with you on that too.
You know where I'm also smart every now and then, maybe not some of my picks this week, depending from these guys, but I love to make these bets at BetMGM, and they have a great promotion that's still going on for the playoffs. So check this out. We've all had our first touchdown bet called back before. BetMGM is giving you a second chance. With BetMGM's Pro Football Second Chance, place any first touchdown score bet, and if your player doesn't score first but scores second, get your entire stake back in cash, no opt-in required. Here's how it works. Place a pregame straight first touchdown score bet in the NFL playoff game. If your player scores the first touchdown in the game, you win your wager as normal. If they score the second touchdown in the game, you'll get your stake back in cash. It's that simple. Log into BetMGM for more details, as I am doing right after this program. Coming up next, I couldn't do a show without a kicker prop, could I? We'll see if Uncle Dave approves after we hear from one of our sponsors. Golf season is back and soon to be on CBS out at Torrey Pines, where I had the pleasure of, taking a look this summer. Great place out there in San Diego. All right, speaking of San Diego, all right, well, not quite anymore, but let's talk about the Chargers, who formerly used to be in San Diego, the Los Angeles Chargers. They're going on the road to Houston, and we are going to play for the kicker prop, or I am going to play, but maybe I can talk Uncle Dave into it. Definitely not proppy. It's Cameron Dicker over 7.5 kicking points. Now, why am I not doing 2 field goals? Because it was minus 155, and we don't do that. Uncle Dave will scold me. So we're going to play this over 7.5 kicking points at minus 120. So he's over this in 12 of 17 games. He made 39 total field goals and 33 extra points this year. And over his last 2 games, the Chargers have really been on a scoring run here. He has 30 total points in his last 2 games. All we need is 8 this week in a game against Houston, which should be favorable for the Chargers in that offense against a Houston team that's going in the wrong direction. Uncle Dave, just a quick approve or disapprove.
I like how you said 30 points. That's all. That doesn't seem possible.
14 and 16 in his last 2 games. Total points.
That's crazy. But that's good for Cameron Dicker, the kicker. And yeah, I like this one. I'm curious what the field goal props were for Justin Tucker's over, for Chase McLaughlin's over, and for Zane Gonzalez, if he's kicking for the Commanders, his over as well.
I did look into those as well. And
did they have a lot of juice?
They did. I mean, Tucker's one I stayed away from. Just they're not kicking as many field goals of late. Okay. Zane Gonzalez I looked into, but he hasn't been the most accurate. If Seibert was back, I like to play Seibert earlier in the year, but Zane Gonzalez not the most accurate. But Dicker has 8 field goals and 9 attempts in the last 2 weeks and 6 extra points. So you know what? I'm taking my shot. Proppy, are you with me? Can you get on board with this one?
Do any of those 30 points count towards this week's point total?
Oh man, I guess unfortunately not. No. Okay, there you go. All right, let's get to the recap screen before I give myself any more embarrassment, let's recap them here. Proppy is on Josh Jacobs under 70.5 rushing yards, Kyron Williams under 21.5 rushing attempts, and Mike Evans under 76.5 receiving yards. Uncle Dave is on Jaden Daniels over 283.5 passing and rushing yards at minus 115 for 1.5 units. Bo Nix over 22.5 completions at minus 120, also for 1.5 units. Jalen Hurts under 27.5 passing attempts for even money, and Ladd McConkey over 74.5 receiving yards at minus 110. I am on a smorgasbord of plays, including Baker Mayfield over 267.5 passing plus rushing yards at minus 115. Derrick Henry's over 20.5 rushing attempts and over 96.5 rushing yards. Marvin Mims over 38.5 receiving yards and his longest reception over 19.5 yards. And of course, Cameron Dicker over 7.5 kicking points. That is not field goals. All right, let's talk. Well, that includes field goals, but not field goals specifically. All right. Uncle Dave, your favorite play of proppies, no, definitely not mine. Favorite play of proppies on the board this week is?
Let the record show that I'm okay with the Marvin Mims over, but it's easy for me to say I'm not in the showdown. I like the Josh Jacobs under. I did enough research on it to say that that's a good one. Not enough for me to actually make that an official pick myself, but I do think that the rationale behind it, the game script that I expect, does work.
Proppy, your favorite play that we talked about from Uncle Dave this week. What do you like?
I love the Ladd McConkey look. I liked that going into it before even Dave gave a description. But I would say that in addition to Ladd McConkey, I thought Dave made a very compelling case for Bo Nix as well. So that's one I'm going to take a closer look at when we conclude this stream here. And Dave made a very sound argument, I felt.
I want to thank everybody in the chat. You guys gave out a bunch of plays that I wish we could have asked the guys about. We've just gone long with our discussions this week. But for those of you, if you're watching on YouTube, go back and read through the comments. A lot of great plays, and I'm sorry we weren't able to get to more of them this week. Hopefully we will be able to do that as the playoffs go along. But great job all around, guys. I want to thank Claire for helping us behind the scenes. She did an awesome job producing the show. So for Proppy and Uncle Dave, I am EC. And as I always like to say, let's hit it big.
Big!
Good luck.